Hello there, everyone. So today we are going to continue talking about nations in Europe in the mid to late 19th century or the 1800s, and specifically today we're going to talk about Austria and Britain. And I think it's going to be interesting because we're going to see like nations here that are going in two directions. One nation in which the government and the monarchy are desperately trying to hold on to power, making things work, and then that being Austria, and then another nation that is on the rise to the position in which it will be the most dominant nation in the world. And that would be Britain. So let's get to it. So first we're going to start with Austria, and that is the imperial flag of Austria in the mid-1800s. So as we have already discussed, you had all those crazy revolutions in 1830. Then you had the even crazier revolutions in 1848. And so Austria decides to make some changes to try to calm things down. But where you just see, it's like they'll make changes and then they just like can't help themselves because the Habsburgs are going to do whatever it takes to just keep themselves in power. So big thing first, we are going to emancipate all of the serfs, okay, as well as making it illegal to do any type of forced labor. So this is a big deal. And so serfs, as you see on the right there, are free and life is good. And then they're going to focus on industrializing their nations. The centers of Vienna, Bohemia, and Galicia, or Galicia, pick one, are going to be massively industrialized, really improving the overall economy. And starting in 1850, the overall economy really starts to grow, which is, of course, huge. Now, the side note, they were mainly German-speaking and didn't necessarily improve the lives for all of the folks in the Austrian Empire, but it's still a good thing because if the economy is going good, then the likelihood of revolution is not super high. You will have a middle class that starts to grow here, and that starts to make the Habsburgs a little bit nervous. They see some of the demands that middle class was trying to work for in other countries. The Habsburgs don't like that. You start to see some like striking and things along that line. And so, and again, this is also predominantly coming from the minority ethnic groups outside of the Austrians, and so the Habsburgs are going to make some changes. And so now we're going to go back. So before it's like, hey, we're going to give some more individualized freedoms, we're getting rid of serfdom and forced labor, and now we're going to centralize power again. And again, this is really aimed at the ethnic groups, and we want to shut the other non-Austrian groups out of power. Up until this point, one of the things throughout the early 1800s that the Austrians did was to give local groups like Serbs or Croats or the Poles that live in the area a little bit of local autonomy. In others, people of that specific ethnic group would have individualized rights within their area, and then they would just answer to the Austrian government, and that is all going to change. So all of that is stripped away. There's no more local rule, okay? Everything is run by the German-led government. So there's basically one tax code, one administrative code. Everything is run by German-speaking officials as well. That is it. Hungary, of course, which I've talked about a couple times earlier in the course, they are the largest of all of the ethnic groups here. They are put, I basically say, under martial law with heavy military occupation. And then to kind of bring it all together, the Catholic Church will be named the state religion, as well as they will be put in charge of all education. And so that, of course, with the loss of autonomy, and then many of the other ethnic groups are not Catholic, they're Protestant or Orthodox Christians. So, one step forward, 36 steps back, I don't know. In order to try to calm people down, the Austrian government then creates a legislature. So the idea of like, hey, I know we're in charge of everything and we jacked all your autonomy, but we're going to create a legislature that all ethnic groups will be represented in, and it's all good. And so initially people were like, all right, well, that's not too bad. This could be okay, right? It's fine. But then once the representation starts coming down, what it was realized that even in this thing, not that the legislature had a lot of power, but it's pretty much dominated by the German speaking Austrians once again. So again, life isn't good for people. But then 1867 happens, and once again, chaos will reign. You have the Austro-Prussian War, and it does not go well for Austria. In fact, they get just beaten senseless, and the Hungarians see that, correctly so, as an opportune time to revolt against the Austrians. And being exhausted from the previous war, they are going to have to make something known as the Compromise of 1867, which in Austria at that time was known as the Ausgleich, or Glick. The Ost part I know is right, but I think it's Ausgleich. Yeah, there we go. Or maybe Ausgleich. It's all good. So anyway, so what this is going to create, the very interesting dual monarchy of Austria-Hungary. So Austria is now gone, and we have a dual monarchy. And so what that means is that, so the country is now Austria-Hungary, all right? So how does this work? So both sides are so you're going to have a geographical split. If you look up there, the darker brown, that is going to be Austria, and then the lightish yellow, that is your Hungary. Okay, so we have that divided up, right? So they both will have a capital. If you see there, Austria has a capital of Vienna, and Hungary has a capital of Budapest. They will also have they each have their own constitution, a bicameral legislature for laws, and they run their domestic policies independent of one another. So domestically, it's all good. However, the Austrians, as far as like foreign affairs and whatnot are considered, will still run the overall country. So there will be a single monarch that holds it together. We still get the Habsburgs, and so you will get Francis Joseph I basically here. He is technically referred to as the Emperor of Austria as well as the King of Hungary, okay? And in here you will have a common army, common finances, and foreign policy that is run by the king or the emperor. So basically what ends up happening here is that Hungary gets complete independence for domestic affairs and allows the Austrians to rule international affairs. But once again, we have all of these ethnic groups that don't have any rights at all. Well, not that they don't have any rights at all, but they don't have any controlling rights, okay? And we've got, Serbs, Slovaks, Slovenes, Russians, Poles, Croats, and Czechs. This is going to lead to massive problems in the future. Austria-Hungary is just clinging to try to keep all of this together. And basically, once they go into Austria-Hungary, I want to liken it a little bit if we go way back to kind of like when the Roman Empire split. When the Roman Empire split, it was into East and West. I mean, you could see under, Diocletian and Constantius and Maximian and all these guys, like, you could see that, like, this wasn't going to work. And it's just a matter of time. Now, that split didn't last wasn't too long before it was all over. But they at least lasted like maybe a century. Whereas in this case, basically we're looking at 50 years. By the time you get to 50 years, Austria-Hungary will eventually cease to exist. But we'll still keep talking about them, but we do have a new nation that is formed, just trying to keep it all together. Contrast that with Victorian England, on the other hand, and, well, this is Boomtown. They have no major disturbances from the revolutions of 1848. They are in a massive period of stability, huge economic growth. Post-1850 through, like, the late 1800s, wages would go up 25%. Work conditions and housing conditions would improve as well. And this is all under the reign of the famous Queen Victoria, who, until Queen Elizabeth II, was the longest reigning monarch in the history of England. She reigned from 1837 to 1901. That is impressive. Her big focus was on unity and unifying the English people, which they really did under Victoria. And it was that unity that will allow them to be the most powerful nation in the world. And we'll get a lot deeper into that when we talk about imperialism. We've already talked about them being the lead dogs in industrialization, as well as science and technology. I mean, these guys are all over the place. She would marry her cousin, because, royal, Albert of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha over in Germany, which will result in some interesting familial patterns, which I'll explain in a moment here. She has 9 kids, 37 grandchildren. The picture on the top right is a picture of a bunch of them. Don't ask me who's who, because I literally have no idea. And the other thing, and we'll get to this when we talk about the cultural aspects of the late 1800s. Very proper. This is kind of where we get the whole idea of like the English gentleman and everything being very strict and orderly and, kind of stiff, in some cases overly moral. It depends on who you ask. So what you're going to end up seeing is very interesting stuff going on in England at the time. The crazy part would be like all these monarchs that are going to end up being descended from Victoria. And now the reason this is, so she has the 9 kids and 37 grandchildren, right? And they're going to marry them all over to basic other royal houses in Europe. But the key thing was when she had her son, King Edward VII, or future King Edward VII, marry Alexandra, who is the daughter of King Christian IX of Denmark. He also had 5 kids, and a number of them kings in other nations. This would just spawn tons of kings and queens from the late 1800s through the early 1900s. So from them, just to name a few, we get Wilhelm II, the Emperor of Germany during World War I, I'm sorry, Victoria Eugenie, the Queen of Spain, Sophia, the Queen of Greece, Alexandra, the Empress of Russia, who will marry another cousin, Nicholas II, who was cousins and like buddies with Wilhelm II, despite the fact that they go to war with another, and Mary, the Queen of Romania, plus many others. Modern day, the royal families of Belgium, Denmark, Norway, Spain, United Kingdom, Netherlands, and Sweden all are still descended from Victoria. So it's crazy. Now, to be all honest, during Victoria's age, the big thing is that the Queen really is slowly but surely going to remove herself from actual political power. And by the 1900s, you're going to have the prime ministers and the legislature, the House of Lords and the House of Commons. They are the ones running the nation. And it is really, throughout the reign of Victoria that she removes herself further and further from this. And so really everything that you have is being driven by a series of strong prime ministers. Like, for instance, one of the biggest changes, and also one of the reasons why we're going to be moving away from the power of the Queen, was increasing the right to vote. Now, leading into the throughout the 1850s, the main prime minister was this guy, Henry John Temple, or Lord Palmerston. And he is the picture on the left, and he's just like, no, he is not going to allow any more people to vote. He does not believe that the commoners really understand stuff, or even this growing and very wealthy middle class. And so he does not want to allow anyone to vote. Remember, at this time in England, in order to vote, there was a property requirement. Well, that is all going to change, and a lot of it is due to the leadership of Benjamin Disraeli and the Tory party. The Tory party today in England is known as the Conservative Party. Benjamin Disraeli was the prime minister in 1868 and 1874 to 1880. He is actually very significant because he is the only ever Jewish person to be prime minister in England. This was a huge deal. Discrimination against Jews in Europe, of course, as we know, very, very common, but more common in England than people realize. At one point, Jews were banished from England for a little while. So this was a pretty big accomplishment that Disraeli was able to do that. In addition to that, his party, whether it was under his leadership as a prime minister or during when he was when he was not the prime minister but still the head of the party, because it's him and another guy I'll talk about, William Gladstone, like rotate back and forth the prime ministership, I guess, for a while. The big thing they passed is the Reform Act of 1867, and what that ends up doing is it doubles the amount of people that can vote. Now, it only goes from 1 to 2 million, but, you got to start somewhere. And it really starts to massively reduce income and taxes requirement, because basically your ability to vote was based on how much money you made or the taxes that you paid. And so in this case, that's going to be massively reduced underneath Disraeli. Other acts after the Reform Act of 1867 would be the acts of 1883 and 1884, which would continue the process, and you basically go from this 1867 to only having 1 million people able to vote, by 1884 having almost 6 million people able to vote, and 16% of the population. And the impact of this is really big. Sorry to kind of lose my screen there. Is really big because you will get further organization of people into political parties. With so many voters, you now have new kind of campaigns, very similar to campaigns that we're going to see today. And it also intensifies rivalries between parties. You know, the whole idea of like voting for a party, not necessarily a person. So much of the modern day politics that you see today really taking shape during this time. And then finally, you have another prime minister who served quite a bit. He served from 4 different times, from 1868 through 1890, and that is William Gladstone. And William Gladstone was a fairly liberal guy and really instituted some major liberal policies within England that would continue to transform it, giving more rights for citizens. They enacted civil service exams, and the whole idea is that you can earn positions by merit rather than patronage or birth. So again, a way for people to move up the social ladder. They instituted the secret ballot, which of course for voting is super huge. They no longer allow wealthy people to buy military commissions, which meant that you could pay to become an officer in the army. No, it is merit, and that's how it's going to be. And they also passed the Education Act of 1870, which makes elementary schools available for all children, regardless of background or birth. And England is just, I mean, they're cruising. They're cruising. I mean, the world dominance here is crazy, and we will continue to talk about it. But we see kind of the difference between what goes on in Austria and then what we end up seeing here in England, okay? All right, guys, so we'll keep continuing on with other videos, but I'll see you soon.